The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never felt so cold, and the 12 elder species who ruled the known galaxy sat in heavy silence as the holographic display showed another world burning. Ambassador Torvon of the Selith Consortium watched the footage with his 4 eyes narrowed, his long fingers gripping the edge of his seat as screaming civilians ran through streets filled with smoke and fire. Kethvora III is lost, announced High Counselor Yithra, her voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of wisdom. The Vreth have taken the capital city, and our ground forces have been completely destroyed. The chamber erupted in fearful whispers and angry shouts as representatives from a dozen worlds demanded answers that nobody could give. The Vreth Dominion had returned after 10,000 years of silence, and they had returned hungry for conquest. These creatures were unlike anything the galaxy had faced in living memory. They were a hive-minded swarm species that moved like a single organism across battlefields. Their chitinous bodies adapted for both burrowing and combat, their numbers seemingly endless. 3 council worlds had already fallen to their advance, and the combined fleets of the elder species had proven useless against an enemy that simply tunneled beneath planetary shields and emerged inside cities. "We must evacuate the remaining populations," suggested Counselor Methon of the Torvon Empire, his scaled face showing rare emotion. "We cannot win this war on the ground." "And where do we evacuate them to?" demanded another counselor. "The Vreth do not stop. They consume everything in their path and move on to the next world." High Counselor Yithra raised one of her 6 arms for silence, and the chamber grew quiet once more. "There may be one option we have not considered," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The humans." The reaction was immediate and negative. "The humans are primitives," shouted a representative from the Mallory Collective. "They have been part of our community for only 40 years. They still fight wars among themselves on their own world." "Their technology is centuries behind ours," added another voice. "They use chemical propellant weapons and wear simple armor. What could they possibly offer against the Vreth?" Ambassador Torvon stood from his seat, and the chamber fell silent. He was old even by Selith standards, and his word carried great weight. "I have studied the humans," he said carefully. "I have watched their history and learned their ways. What I found disturbed me greatly, but it also gave me something I had not felt in many years." "And what is that?" asked High Counselor Yithra. "Hope," Torvon replied simply. "The humans have been fighting wars since before they could write. They have refined the art of ground combat over thousands of years of continuous conflict. Their soldiers are not elegant or sophisticated, but they are effective beyond anything we have ever seen." The chamber buzzed with uncertain murmurs as counselors exchanged worried glances. "You suggest we invite these warlike primitives to fight for us?" asked Counselor Methon with obvious distaste. "I suggest we have no other choice," Torvon answered. "Our species abandoned ground warfare millennia ago. We believed it beneath us, a relic of less civilized times. But the Vreth do not care about our beliefs. They care only about victory, and they are winning." High Counselor Yithra considered his words for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Send the request," she commanded. "Contact Earth and ask for whatever soldiers they can spare. We will offer them whatever payment they desire." The message was sent across the vast distances of space, and the galaxy held its breath while waiting for a response. On Earth, the request arrived at the headquarters of the newly formed Terran Expeditionary Corps, and General Sarah Okonkwo read it with a mixture of surprise and grim satisfaction. "They finally need us," she said to her aide. "Get me Colonel Cole. Tell him to assemble his best veterans. We ship out in 24 hours." Colonel Marcus Cole received the orders while sitting in a small bar in Lagos, nursing a drink and trying not to think about the friends he had lost in the African resource wars. He was 52 years old, with gray hair at his temples and scars that mapped the history of human conflict across 3 continents. When he read the mission briefing, a small smile crossed his weathered face. "Aliens need help fighting a bug war," he muttered to himself. "And they come to us. Well, it is about time someone recognized what we bring to the table." Within 72 hours, a single human transport vessel entered orbit above HFY 3, and the Galactic Council watched through their observation drones with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. The ship was nothing special by galactic standards. It was a converted cargo hauler with basic weapons and minimal shielding, the kind of vessel that more advanced species used for transporting livestock. But inside that humble ship were 800 human soldiers from a dozen different nations, united under a single flag and a single purpose. They were veterans of Earth's many wars. Some had fought in the frozen mountains of Central Asia, others in the burning deserts of North Africa, still others in the urban hellscapes of South America. They carried the weight of countless battles in their eyes and the memory of fallen friends in their hearts. Colonel Cole stood at the front of the cargo bay as the ship descended through the atmosphere, and he looked out at the faces of his soldiers with quiet pride. "Listen up," he called out, his voice cutting through the rumble of the engines. "The Council thinks we are primitives. They think we are savages who have not evolved past our violent natures. Today, we are going to show them exactly what human soldiers can do." A chorus of approval rose from the assembled troops, and weapons were checked one final time as the transport touched down on the scorched earth of HFY 3. The Galactic Council observed from the safety of Nexus Prime, their screens showing the small group of humans stepping onto a world where 2 million Vreth warriors waited in their underground hives. "This is madness," whispered Counselor Methon. 800 soldiers against 2 million. They will be slaughtered within the hour. High Counselor Yithra said nothing as she watched the humans form up in orderly lines, their primitive weapons held ready, their faces showing no fear. She had studied many species in her long life, but she had never seen anything quite like the calm determination on those human faces. "Perhaps," she murmured softly, "or perhaps we are about to see something the galaxy has never witnessed before." The sun was setting on HFY 3, and the ground beneath the humans' feet began to tremble as the Vreth sensed fresh prey above them. Colonel Cole lit a cigarette and watched the horizon with steady eyes. "Here they come," he said quietly. "Let us show these bugs what humanity is made of." And somewhere in the darkness below, 2 million hungry mouths opened wide and prepared to feast. The ash-covered plains of HFY 3 stretched out in every direction, and the dying light of the alien sun painted everything in shades of orange and red. Colonel Marcus Cole walked among his soldiers as they prepared for battle, and he felt a familiar calm settle over him. This was where he belonged, among warriors who understood the simple truth of combat. Sergeant Major Chen approached him with a datapad showing the tactical layout of the area, his face grim but focused. "We have confirmed Vreth activity in a 2-kilometer radius around the main hive cluster," Chen reported. "Estimated enemy numbers somewhere between 1 and 2 million. They are staying underground for now, but thermal scans show they are massing just below the surface." Cole nodded and took a long drag from his cigarette before responding. "Standard defensive formation," he ordered. "I want overlapping fields of fire and ammunition reserves positioned at regular intervals. Tell the sergeants to keep their people calm and ready." "Yes, sir," Chen replied, before moving off to relay the orders. Across the battlefield, human soldiers moved with practiced efficiency. Weapons were checked and cleaned, ammunition was counted and distributed, defensive positions were marked and fortified with whatever materials could be found. The Galactic Council observers watched through their drones and found themselves confused by what they saw. Why are they not deploying energy shields? asked one analyst on Nexus Prime. Their armor appears to be simple ballistic plating. It will offer no protection against Vreth acid or claw attacks. High Counselor Yithra studied the humans with growing interest, noting the way they moved and communicated. They are not panicking, she observed quietly. Every other species we have sent against the Vreth has shown signs of fear and anxiety before the battle even begins. These humans show nothing but calm purpose. On the ground, Captain Yuki Tanaka gathered her company around her for final instructions. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority far beyond her size. Listen carefully, she told her soldiers. These Vreth are going to come at us in waves. They will try to overwhelm us with numbers and break our formation. We are not going to let that happen. How do we stop them? Asked a young private who had only recently joined the Corps. Tanaka smiled, though there was no warmth in it. We shoot them until they stop moving, she answered simply. And when we run low on ammunition, we fix bayonets and stab them. And when our bayonets break, we use our knives, and when our knives are gone, we use our hands and teeth. We do not stop fighting until every single one of us is dead, or every single one of them is dead. That is how we win. The young private swallowed hard but nodded, and around him the veteran soldiers checked their weapons one more time, with expressions that showed neither fear nor excitement. They had all heard speeches like this before, and they knew that Captain Tanaka was not exaggerating. Across the Council Observation Network, analysts were taking note of the humans' equipment and tactics. Their weapons are remarkably primitive, noted a Seleth weapons expert. Chemical propellant firearms that launch metal projectiles. We abandoned such technology over 4,000 years ago. And yet they continue to use them, Ambassador Torvan pointed out. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why. Before anyone could respond, the ground on Kethvora 3 began to shake violently, and thousands of Vreth warriors burst from the earth in a coordinated eruption of chitin and fury. The swarm was terrifying to behold. Each Vreth stood nearly 2 meters tall, with armored plates covering their insectoid bodies and claws that could tear through metal. They moved with a single purpose, directed by the hive mind of their distant queen, and their numbers seemed endless. On the council observation deck, several representatives cried out in alarm and turned away from their screens. "It is over," declared Councillor Methan with grim certainty. "No force in the galaxy can withstand a charge like that." But on the plains of Kethvora 3, Colonel Cole simply raised his hand and spoke a single word into his communicator. Fire. The battlefield erupted in thunder as 800 human soldiers opened fire simultaneously, and the effect was devastating beyond anything the Council had ever witnessed. The primitive projectile weapons that the aliens had dismissed so easily tore through Vreth armor with brutal efficiency. Each bullet was designed to tumble and fragment upon impact, creating wounds that no amount of chitinous plating could prevent. The front ranks of the Vreth charge simply disintegrated under the concentrated fire, and those behind stumbled over the bodies of the fallen. "Maintain fire discipline," Cole ordered calmly over the roar of combat. "Watch your sectors and conserve ammunition. Let them come to us." The humans fought with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural to the watching council members. Squads moved in perfect synchronization, covering each other's positions and adjusting their fire to meet each new threat. When one group needed to reload, another pushed forward to fill the gap. When the Vreth attempted to flank, human soldiers were already moving to intercept them. "How are they doing this?" demanded one council analyst. "They have no neural links, no battle computers directing their movements. How do they coordinate so perfectly?" Ambassador Torvan watched the battle unfold with a knowing expression. "They have something better than technology," he said softly. "They have 10,000 years of practice." On the battlefield, Sergeant Okonkwo found herself surrounded by 3 Vreth warriors who had broken through the defensive line. Without hesitation, she emptied her rifle into the first, drew her sidearm, and killed the second, then pulled her combat knife and drove it through the eye of the third. A claw caught her shoulder and tore through flesh and muscle, but she barely flinched. She simply reversed her grip on the knife, finished off the wounded Vreth, and reached for a field dressing while shouting orders to nearby soldiers. 8 minutes later, she was back on the line, with her arm hastily bandaged and her rifle reloaded. The council observers watched in stunned disbelief as similar scenes played out across the battlefield. Humans who suffered wounds that would have incapacitated other species simply treated their injuries and continued fighting. "What are they?" whispered High Counselor Yethra, her voice filled with something that might have been awe or fear. The battle raged on as the sun set completely and darkness fell over Kethvora III, and still the humans held their ground. They fought by the light of muzzle flashes and burning Vreth corpses, their night vision equipment giving them an advantage that the hive mind had not anticipated. Colonel Cole moved among his troops, offering words of encouragement and adjusting positions where needed. He seemed to be everywhere at once, a steady presence in the chaos of combat. "Hold the line," he called out repeatedly. "They are just bugs. We have been killing bugs since we lived in caves." Nothing has changed, except the size. Laughter rippled through the human ranks at his words, and the council observers found themselves even more confused. How could these soldiers laugh in the middle of such carnage? They did not understand what the humans knew in their bones, that humor and camaraderie were weapons just as deadly as any rifle. As the first hour of battle stretched into the second, the Vreth assault began to slow. The carpet of dead bodies in front of the human positions had grown so thick that the living had difficulty climbing over them. And somewhere deep beneath the surface, the Vreth Queen felt something she had never experienced before. For the first time in her long existence, she felt doubt. 6 hours had passed since the first Vreth erupted from the ground, and the battlefield of Kethvora III had transformed into something from a nightmare. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning chitin, and the ground was so covered with Vreth corpses that the humans had to stand on bodies just to maintain their firing positions. But still they fought on, and the Galactic Council watched in stunned silence from the safety of Nexus Prime. "This is impossible," muttered a Selith analyst as he reviewed the combat data. "No species can sustain this level of combat intensity for this long. Their bodies should have collapsed from exhaustion hours ago." High Counselor Yethra said nothing, her eyes fixed on the images before her. She had lived for 3,000 years and seen countless battles, but she had never witnessed anything like what these humans were doing. On the ground, Colonel Cole checked in with each of his company commanders in turn, getting status reports and adjusting the defensive line where needed. Alpha Company reporting 40% ammunition remaining. Captain Rodriguez called in. "We have taken 17 casualties, 6 fatal. The rest are patched up and still fighting." Bravo Company at 35% ammunition, came Captain Tanaka's voice. 22 casualties, 4 fatal. We are holding strong. The reports continued, and Cole listened to each one with the calm focus that came from decades of experience. The numbers were not good, but they were not catastrophic either. "All units, this is Cole," he announced over the general channel. "We have been at this for 6 hours, and we are still standing. The Vreth have thrown everything they have at us, and we have not given them 1 inch of ground. I am proud of every single one of you." A ragged cheer rose from the human lines, and soldiers who moments before had seemed ready to collapse from fatigue found new energy in their commander's words. The council observers noted this phenomenon with great interest. "Their morale appears to increase when their commander speaks to them," observed Ambassador Torvon. "This is not a tactical advantage we have studied before." "It seems irrational," replied Councillor Methan. "Words cannot replenish ammunition or heal wounds. What practical purpose does this serve?" Torvald turned to face his colleague with an expression that mixed pity with understanding. "That is exactly why we cannot win this war on our own," he said quietly. "We had spent so long perfecting our technology that we have forgotten the power of the spirit." The humans have not forgotten. On the battlefield, Sergeant Major Chen led a squad to reinforce a section of the line that had been hit particularly hard. He found Private First Class Sarah Mabiki holding the position alone, her rifle empty and a combat knife in each hand. Around her lay the bodies of 11 Vreth she had killed after running out of ammunition. "Sergeant Major," she said with a tired grin, "I was wondering when the relief would arrive." Chen handed her a fresh magazine and clapped her on the shoulder with genuine respect. "Good work, Private," he said simply. "Now get back in the fight." Mabiki reloaded her weapon and returned to the firing line without another word, and Chen moved on to the next crisis point. This was the nature of human warfare that the Council could not understand. It was not about technology or numbers or tactical superiority. It was about the simple refusal to quit, the determination to keep fighting long after any reasonable being would have surrendered. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out over and over again. Soldiers who had been fighting for hours without rest found strength they did not know they possessed. Medics treated wounds with one hand while firing their sidearms with the other. Officers led from the front, sharing every danger with their troops. The Vreth hive mind sensed the mounting losses and adjusted its tactics. Instead of throwing masses of warriors at the human lines, it began probing for weaknesses, looking for gaps in the defense that could be exploited. But every time the swarm found what seemed like an opening, humans appeared to fill it. They moved with an instinctive understanding of the battlefield that came from generations of warfare. "They are adapting faster than we can," the Vreth Queen realized with growing alarm. "Every tactic we employ, they counter within minutes. This is not how prey is supposed to behave." Back on Nexus Prime, the Council was reaching similar conclusions. "The humans are not fighting like a military force," observed a tactical analyst. "They are fighting like a single organism. Each individual seems to know exactly where they are needed, and moves there without being ordered." "That is because they trust each other," Ambassador Torvald explained. "Each human soldier knows that the soldier beside them will do their job. They do not need central coordination, because they have something more powerful binding them together." "And what is that?" asked High Counselor Yithra. "Love," Torvald replied simply. "They love each other, and because of that love, they fight with a ferocity that no amount of technology can replicate." The Council fell silent as they contemplated his words, and on the plains of Kethvora III, the battle continued to rage. 8 hours into the engagement, Colonel Cole called for a brief tactical pause. The Vreth had pulled back temporarily to regroup, and the humans needed every moment of rest they could steal. "Drink water, eat something, check your ammunition," he ordered. "We have maybe 30 minutes before they come again." Soldiers collapsed where they stood, some falling asleep instantly despite the chaos around them. The human ability to sleep anywhere, under any conditions, was another adaptation that the Council found fascinating and disturbing. Corporal James Wilson sat down next to his squad leader, Sergeant O'Brien, and shared a protein bar that had somehow survived the hours of combat. "You think we can hold?" Wilson asked quietly. O'Brien looked out at the carpet of Vreth dead that stretched as far as they could see in every direction, then looked back at the young corporal with tired eyes. "I think we have to," she replied, "because if we do not hold here, these things will spread across the galaxy and kill everything in their path. We are the only thing standing between them and trillions of innocent lives." Wilson nodded slowly and finished his half of the protein bar. "No pressure then," he said with a weak smile. O'Brien laughed despite herself, and nearby soldiers joined in. The sound of human laughter rolling across a battlefield littered with alien corpses, was perhaps the strangest thing the Council had witnessed yet. High Counselor Yithra turned to Ambassador Torvan with a question that had been forming in her mind for hours. If we had contacted the humans earlier, she asked, could they have prevented the fall of the other three worlds? Torvan considered the question carefully before answering. Almost certainly, he said finally. The humans have been trying to offer their military assistance since they joined the galactic community. We refused because we considered them too primitive and too violent. And now we are watching 800 of them hold back a force of 2 million through nothing but skill, determination, and the refusal to die. Torvan replied, I would say our assessment was incorrect. The 30 minutes of rest ended when the ground began to shake again, and the Vreth poured forth in even greater numbers than before. Colonel Cole stood at the center of his line, rifle in hand, and watched the tide of chitinous bodies approach. Here we go again, he said, to no one in particular. Let us teach these bugs another lesson. And the thunder of human weapons filled the air once more. 18 hours of continuous combat had passed when the Vreth Queen made her final decision, and deep beneath the surface of Kethvora III, she gathered her elite guard for one last overwhelming assault. These were not ordinary Vreth warriors. These were the Queen's chosen, bred specifically for war over countless generations. Each one stood 3 meters tall, with armor plates thick enough to stop most projectile weapons, and claws capable of tearing through starship hulls. 10,000 of them massed in the tunnels below the battlefield, waiting for the signal to emerge and destroy the stubborn prey that had resisted for so long. On the surface, Colonel Cole surveyed his remaining forces with a heavy heart. Of the original 800 soldiers, only 647 were still able to fight. The rest lay in the field hospital behind the lines, too wounded to continue, but refusing to be evacuated. Colonel, we are down to 30% ammunition across all companies, Sergeant Major Chen reported grimly. At the current rate of fire, we have maybe 2 more hours before we are fighting with knives. Cole nodded and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council was watching their every move, judging humanity based on what happened in the next few hours. What is the status of our people? He asked. Exhausted, but determined, sir, Chen replied. Not one of them has asked to be pulled from the line. They know what is at stake. Before Cole could respond, the ground began to shake with a violence that dwarfed anything they had experienced before, and the elite guard of the Vreth Queen erupted from the earth in a wave of armored fury. The council observers gasped as they saw the size and strength of these new enemies. Each elite warrior was a monster, and there were 10,000 of them charging directly at the human positions. It is over, declared Councillor Methan with absolute certainty. Nothing can survive that assault. We should begin evacuation protocols for the remaining human survivors. But High Counselor Yithra held up her hand for silence, her eyes fixed on the image of Colonel Cole standing at the center of the human line. She wanted to see what he would do. On the battlefield, every human soldier could see the massive forms approaching through the darkness, and for the first time in the long battle, fear began to creep into their hearts. These were not the smaller warriors they had been fighting all night. These were true monsters, and they were coming fast. Colonel Cole reached up and slowly removed his helmet, letting the cool night air touch his sweat-soaked hair. Then he pulled out a cigarette, lit it with steady hands, and took a long drag before speaking into his communicator. All units, this is Cole, he said, his voice calm and clear despite the approaching doom. They are sending everything they have at us. That means they are scared. They have thrown millions of warriors at us, and we are still standing. Now they have nothing left but their best, and they are hoping it will be enough to break us. He paused and looked out at his soldiers, these tired and wounded warriors who had already given more than anyone could reasonably ask. "It will not be enough," he continued, "because we are human soldiers. We have been fighting and dying and winning impossible battles since before recorded history. Our ancestors stood against odds like this 1,000 times, and they did not break. Neither will we." The elite Vreth were getting closer now, their massive forms filling the horizon like a wall of death. "Fix bayonets," Cole ordered quietly. The command rippled through the ranks, and 647 soldiers drew their blades and attached them to their rifles with sharp clicks. It was a sound that had echoed across battlefields for 400 years, a sound that meant the fighting was about to become personal. The council watched in disbelief as the humans prepared for close combat against enemies 3 times their size. "What are they doing?" asked a bewildered analyst. "They should be retreating to more defensible positions. This is tactical suicide." Ambassador Torvan smiled sadly and shook his head. "No," he said, "this is what makes humans what they are. They do not retreat, because retreat means abandoning each other. They would rather die together than live having left someone behind." On the battlefield, Colonel Cole raised his rifle and pointed it at the approaching horde. "Soldiers of Earth," he called out, his voice rising above the thunder of approaching footsteps. "We charge together. We fight together. We win together. For humanity." The cry was taken up by 647 voices, a roar of defiance that shook the very air. For humanity! And then the humans charged. They ran directly at the elite Vreth Guard, these tired and wounded soldiers against fresh monsters bred for war. And the two forces collided in an explosion of violence that would be remembered for centuries. The council chamber fell absolutely silent as they watched the impossible unfold. Human soldiers threw themselves at creatures 3 times their size, with no regard for their own safety. They ducked under slashing claws and drove bayonets into soft joints. They fired point-blank into alien faces and kept fighting even when their weapons were torn from their hands. Sergeant Major Chen found himself facing an elite warrior alone after his squad was scattered. He emptied his rifle into its face, drew his pistol, and emptied that too, then grabbed a fallen bayonet and drove it through the creature's eye with a scream of pure fury. The beast fell, and Chen picked up another weapon from the ground and charged the next enemy without pausing to catch his breath. Captain Tanaka led her remaining soldiers in a wedge formation that cut through the Vreth ranks like a knife. She killed 4 elite warriors personally before a claw took her left arm below the elbow. She used her rifle one-handed to kill 2 more before allowing herself to be dragged to safety. Corporal Wilson went down under 3 elite warriors but refused to stop fighting. He detonated a grenade in his own hand and took all 3 of them with him, giving his squad the opening they needed to flank the enemy position. The battle was brutal and intimate and terrible, and it went on for what felt like hours, but was really only minutes. And then something unprecedented happened. The Vreth elite guard began to falter. The psychic link that connected them to their queen was overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the combat. 10,000 simultaneous battles, each one generating fear and pain and death in quantities that the hive mind had never experienced. One by one, the elite warriors began to hesitate, to stumble, to show the first signs of individual fear as their connection to the queen wavered. And the humans noticed. "They are breaking," shouted Sergeant O'Brien, her voice rising above the chaos. "Push them harder." The cry spread through the human ranks, and soldiers who had been fighting on pure willpower found new reserves of strength. They pressed their attack with renewed ferocity, driving into the weakening Vreth formation. Deep beneath the surface, the Vreth Queen screamed as her psychic connection shattered. The death of 10,000 elite warriors in such a short time had overloaded her ability to control them, and without her guidance, the remaining swarm fell into chaos. The hive mind that had conquered 3 council worlds dissolved into 10 million confused individuals, and those individuals knew only one thing: fear. High Counselor Yethra watched the Vreth army collapse into disorganized retreat, and she felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time in centuries. "They did it," she whispered. "By all the stars in the galaxy, they actually did it." On the battlefield, Colonel Cole stood among the bodies of fallen enemies and fallen friends, his uniform soaked in blood, both human and alien, and watched the remaining Vreth flee into the darkness. They had won. The price had been terrible. Of the 647 soldiers who had charged into the elite guard, only 412 were still alive. The others lay where they had fallen, their final moments spent fighting for each other. But they had broken the unbreakable enemy. They had done the impossible, and the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. 3 days had passed since the Battle of Kethvora III, and the Galactic Council had gathered in emergency session to discuss what they had witnessed. The Great Chamber was filled to capacity, with representatives from every major species crowding the observation galleries. They had all watched the footage, and they had all come seeking answers. High Counselor Yethra stood at her podium and looked out at the assembly with eyes that had seen too much in recent days. "We have confirmed that the Vreth Dominion is in full retreat," she announced. "Their queen was killed by the psychic backlash of losing her elite guard, and without her guidance, the remaining swarm has scattered to the outer rim. They no longer pose an immediate threat to Council space." Murmurs of relief rippled through the chamber, but they were quickly followed by questions. "What about the humans?" called out a representative from the Melori Collective. "What is their status?" Yethra paused before answering, and when she spoke, her voice was heavy with emotion. "Of the 800 human soldiers who deployed to Kethvora III, 412 survived the battle," she said. "They are currently on the surface, burying their dead." The chamber fell silent at these words. The council species had long abandoned the practice of burial, preferring more efficient methods of disposing of remains. Ambassador Torvon rose from his seat to explain. "It is a human tradition," he said. "When soldiers fall in battle, their comrades inter them in the ground where they died. They believe that the spirits of the fallen will watch over that place forever, protecting it from future harm." "A superstition," scoffed Counselor Methan, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Perhaps," Torvon replied, "or perhaps it is something more. When I asked Colonel Cole why they insisted on this ritual, despite their exhaustion and wounds, he told me something I will never forget." "What did he say?" asked High Counselor Yethra. "He said that every soldier who died on Kethvora III died protecting someone else. They died so that their brothers and sisters could live. The least the living can do is carry them home, and if they cannot carry them home, they will make that place a home worth dying for." The chamber was absolutely silent as the weight of those words settled over the assembly. On the surface of Kethvora III, the human soldiers continued their somber work. They had dug 388 graves in the ash-covered earth, each one marked with a simple cross or star or crescent, depending on the faith of the fallen. Colonel Cole stood at the head of the makeshift cemetery, his wounds bandaged and his uniform still bearing the stains of battle. He had not slept since the fighting ended, refusing to rest until every one of his soldiers was properly honored. Sergeant Major Chen approached him with a flask of water and a quiet word. "Sir, the council wants to speak with you," he said. "Their representative is waiting at the landing zone." Cole took a long drink of water and looked out at the rows of graves. "Tell them I will be there when I am finished here," he replied. "These soldiers gave their lives for a galaxy that did not believe in them. I will not rush their funeral for the convenience of politicians." Chen nodded and moved off to relay the message, and Cole turned back to his fallen comrades. One by one he spoke their names aloud, a final roll call that would ensure they were not forgotten. Back in the council chamber, the debate continued. "We must acknowledge what the humans have done for us," insisted Ambassador Torvan. "They saved Kethvora III when we had given it up for lost. They broke an enemy that we believed unbeatable. They sacrificed nearly half their force to protect species who had dismissed them as primitives." "What do you propose?" asked High Counselor Yithra. "I propose that we offer humanity a permanent seat on the Galactic Council," Torvan said, and the chamber erupted in shocked voices. "They have been members of the galactic community for only 40 years, protested Counselor Methon. "Our traditions require at least 500 years of membership before a species can be considered for council status." "Our traditions also assumes that no species could do what the humans just did," Torvan countered. "Perhaps it is time to reconsider our traditions." The argument went back and forth for hours, but in the end, the vote was unanimous. Humanity would be granted a seat on the Galactic Council, the first species in history to achieve that honor in less than a century. When the decision was communicated to Kethvora III, Colonel Cole simply nodded and returned to his work. The politics could wait until his duty to the dead was complete. It was Ambassador Chen Wei who formally accepted the honor on behalf of humanity. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, but when she spoke to the council, her voice carried the weight of billions. "You asked us for soldiers," she said, "and we sent you family. Every human who fights does so knowing they might never return home. They fight anyway because they understand something fundamental about the nature of courage." She paused and looked around the chamber at the representatives of 100 different species. "Courage is not the absence of fear," she continued. "Courage is being afraid and fighting anyway because something matters more than your fear. Our soldiers were terrified on Kethvora III. But they fought because they loved each other, because they believed in protecting those who could not protect themselves. You call us primitive because we still fight wars among ourselves, because we have not outgrown our violent nature. But perhaps violence is not the flaw you believe it to be. Perhaps it is a tool, like any other, that can be used for good or for evil. Our soldiers did not fight the Vreth because they enjoyed killing. They fought because innocent lives were at stake. They fought because running away would have meant abandoning everything they believed in." She turned to face High Counselor Yithra directly. "You want to know the secret of human warfare?" she asked. "It is not our weapons or our tactics or our endurance. It is love. We love each other with a fierceness that defies reason. Hurt one of us, threaten one of us, and you face all of us. That is the lesson the Vreth learned on Kethvora III. That is the lesson the galaxy should remember." The council chamber was silent for a long moment after she finished speaking, and then Ambassador Torvan began to applause. One by one, other representatives joined in, until the entire assembly was standing in recognition of what humanity had achieved. Bars and homes and public squares filled with celebrations, as people learned that their soldiers had won an impossible victory and earned humanity a place among the stars. But in the veteran halls and memorial gardens, those who truly understood the cost gathered in quiet reflection. They raised their glasses to the 400 who would never come home, and they wept for friends who had given everything. Colonel Cole finally returned to Earth 3 weeks later, walking with a limp that the doctors said would never fully heal. He was met at the landing pad by General Okonkwo and a crowd of thousands who had come to welcome their heroes home. "You did something incredible out there," the general told him as they walked through the cheering masses. "The whole galaxy is talking about what your soldiers accomplished." Cole nodded, but did not smile. "We did our job," he said simply. "That is all any soldier can do." We protect those who cannot protect themselves, and we never leave our people behind. He paused and looked back at the transport that had carried him home. 388 of my soldiers are still on Kefvora 3, he said quietly. They gave their lives so that the rest of us could come back. I want to make sure the galaxy never forgets that. General Okonkwo placed a hand on his shoulder. They will not forget, she promised. The Council has already voted to establish a memorial on the battlefield. They are calling it the Field of Human Valor, and it will stand for as long as the galaxy remembers what happened there. Cole finally allowed himself a small smile. That is a good name, he said. My soldiers would have liked that. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the galaxy had learned a simple truth that would echo through the ages. Humans were not primitives to be dismissed, or savages to be feared. They were protectors, warriors, and friends. They were a species that fought not for conquest or glory, but for love. And they were not to be underestimated, ever.